So, game is Parthenon. Just finished it up. It's primarily a trading game, it seems like, and that's no big shock. But most of the action, there's a little bit of action as to deciding, and a little bit of thought as to deciding, okay, what am I going to go for this turn? What can I get? What does my production allow me to buy? What risks am I willing to take? But a lot of it is, can I just get, the deal that I need from other people before I take it to sailing out to sea? And if I can work those deals out, that's all well and good. But if I can't get what I need, I may have to take a risky journey. And that's really the key, is these neighboring lands, they seem appealing because you only have to draw one hazard card. But the truth of the matter is, you can't afford not to be taking these prices. And you do, kind of want to maybe minimize your risk. But early in my game, it was very, very easy to travel. It got uglier as things went on, I think. The hazard deck is definitely a problem. We didn't see anybody buy warships in my game, and there are only a few pirate cards in here, so it's kind of a, okay, is it worth the risk? Is it worth having a goal? Well, it's fairly cheap to put a warship on the board at some point or another, especially when you have to compare it to the other option, say if you have a spare gold kicking around, which is maybe buying another fleet, which doesn't really help that much. 2 fleets seems to be the magic point here. Spending 2 gold to get a 3rd fleet. Nobody did it. Some people got by with just 1 fleet. And I think even one of the people up in the victors circled it. But for the armies, well, the problem with them is they seem great early on, and they're going to give you production throughout the whole game. But eventually, that production becomes a little less important. Earlier on, those basic commodities are valuable. But here's the problem, even earlier, sometimes you're sitting on some because you don't have a good combination, and ones that you have to throw away. You can't make the trades you want, whatever. Later in the game, well, if you've got the shipping, 2 of them turn into a gold. And that's the one reason you might want that 3rd ship, is just for total throughput. I didn't find that was too big a deal, especially after the free trades or whatever come into play. But whatever. And actually, the one wonder that gives you the ability to clone, you could bring another free trade into place, which could be really valuable as well. What do I think of the combination here? Component-wise, it's nice. You got a player aid card for everybody that explains all the upgrades, all the information, most of the rules on here. Everybody's got their own little sequence of play card in their deck. If I can find it, to give them all the different phases in the proper order. The little ships are kind of neat, the board, the board it's tiny, etc., but everything seems kind of functional. The only scary thing, obviously, the footprint on this. If you're playing it with a lot of people, it's going to take up a decent amount of space, there's no question there. Decision making as to what to buy at any given time, it doesn't really feel like you have, maybe this is just me looking from one playing in a very limited perspective, but it doesn't feel like there are a lot of options, and it doesn't feel like they're real major changers of the game. I thought philosophy might be just such a thing, but to tell you the truth, the values that it provides are fairly limited. Once per year usually for the things. You're able to sort of prevent a bad thing from happening to you. Sophistry, it's kind of a strange thing that I didn't use this because it allows you to cheat the commodity type, and that's kind of cool. Oh, you guys are short on wool. I know it gets cold and everything, but you could bury yourself in grapes. The different philosophies, some of them make more sense than others. I'm not sure how much Epicureanism, avoiding harbor status cards, really makes any sense. Idealism duplicating a power, I mean, why? Some of them just aren't linked. Some of them are. Stoicism, for example, makes sense with how it works. The hazards and the harbor statuses add a nice bit of randomness to the game that's not really unstabling, and the fact that they generally affect a swath of players. The only real choice there is, do you go to a neighboring land or do you, for the hazards, or do you go to a foreign land, and because the neighboring and foreign lands have different hazard sets, and you have less for the neighboring land. So once you make that decision, though, you're probably sharing your fate with everyone else. It's possible that the biggest ship gets hit or whatever instead of something else, but for the most part, it's possible. And you know what? I'm forgetting what I did. Something allowed you to, and I don't remember what it is. Maybe it was a philosophy. To avoid, oh no, we never used these. The Gift of Poseidon. Replacing your hazard card. Nobody actually bought one, and that's probably was a mistake on my part. They look like an interesting mechanism, but by the time I got to feeling like I could explore the game, I also felt like, gee, I know exactly what I want to buy. I can, fiddle it down to the goal, basically. Not much shallower than that once you get down to the basic resources. But the problem is producing one of those things requires what? A temple or a shrine, and that costs you a rare. Now a rare is more valuable than a gold in my view. So just because you can trade it with other people for another rare, and a rare costs 2 gold to get elsewhere, it's very hard to part with a rare in exchange for whatever. And the Gift of Poseidon, well, you have to send that as one of your 6 cards, so it means you're going to be sending less stuff. And that's the same problem with the fleet. I'm not sure why you would ship an army, except coming back home from Italy. It's apparently possible by the rules, but it doesn't really much. The event cards for the years, these can be really, really potent, but again, they're kind of a shared effect. And each player has opportunities, again, to kind of blunt their effects or control them or prepare for them ahead of time if they can peek at them. Nice little mechanisms. There's a lot of randomness, but there's ways of mitigating the danger from the randomness. Of course, if you're spending your efforts on mitigating that danger, like Gift of Poseidon, you may not be running your economy as well as you should be. The different buildings, and especially the wonders, yes, they have an effect, but they're not usually game-changing. The only real thing that scares me about some of the wonders, some of them feel like they have expenses that are just much, much higher or maybe harder to achieve than others. For example, you discard your entire production for the turn. Now that could be a really cool one for somebody who's losing to get, but if you're in the running in the game, you're probably not going to spend your entire production to get one upgrade on a wonder. The mechanism of having to get them in Athens, again, kind of weird. You want to get these things early, I think, because you want to know what you have to plan for. The guy who took a long time getting his ended up really hosed on that. Unfortunately, there's this opportunity cost because, there's a great trade that I can take advantage of over in Ionia, or I can go to Athens and get my thing. And likewise, certain harbor statuses brought some of the people, like the wool shortage, brought some people to Athens in order to make trades that maybe they wouldn't have gone for the card otherwise. I think you have to make a real commitment in your mind. Hey, I'm willing to take a shorter trade or buy a second ship to do this, because you really do need that second ship, I think, in the long run anyway. And the rules definitely imply that. The different commodities themselves, they provide an interesting mix. Everything's available to you. And in the 6-player game, you're not, one person doesn't dominate a commodity ever. I think in smaller players that may happen. But in 6, if you've got 3 of a commodity, someone else produces 2 of it potentially, and someone else produces 1. So although you may have the excess of it available and maybe more willing to trade, there will always be some available. You can't cut it out. And worst comes to worst, this sets certain minimum trade values. I mean, come on. If you can go get a 2-for-1 trade in a neighboring land, you're never going to make that trade with people unless you've got so much production you can't ship it all. And likewise with the foreign land, the 1-for-1, once you're starting to use the foreign lands heavily, once you feel safe doing that, there's nothing really to... you're not going to see 2-for-1 trades between players, because why give that advantage to someone else? Now, obviously, once you have too much throughput for your shipping, or if you get into that kind of situation, it becomes a little bit more reasonable to overpay. But you're not going to see situations like you do, say, in Settlers of Catan, where somebody, dominates one resource just because of the luck of the dice of where it comes out, and then everybody's reaching for that and trying to pick that up for whatever cost they can get. They're willing to pay anything to get it. I don't think you see that. Everything's got kind of a fixed price. The market rate may fluctuate a little bit, especially when something's got a real bonus, like. So let's say resources can be traded 1-for-1 for gold, like they're in a shortage. Well, if I have one, do I really want to ship that resource for a gold? Well, maybe I can get the 2-for-1 deal to hand that off to someone else who is going to go there. They get their gold, which, if it's a nearby area, isn't a bad deal for them. And even if it's a far area, they're shipping less to get that gold, right? And then, well, on my side, I might get the 2 resources for 1 at a time when I wouldn't otherwise be able to get them. So, while there's sort of this, base price that's fixed throughout the game and doesn't change too much, it does have some fluctuation, and you might see people hitting rates that are a little surprising at certain times of the game, just because of what's available and what's seen. Anyway, overall, I think I'd definitely like to give this a shot in a large group. I like trading type games. They're hard solo though, and I haven't played this enough to have, like I had in Civilization, sort of this mechanism for determining the trades. I also think it's more difficult here, because in Civilization usually, and I mentioned this in one of the vids I think, in Civilization you usually have a handful of cards and you can see, I want to collect this, this, or this, and I just want to collect that set. And collecting a set, making the deals to do that, is an easier process to manage across several players as one person than, I need to buy this, and there's just so many branching, so many options of what you can do. And really, for the most part, other than the wonders, which you only get out there early, I think, other than the wonders, buying things feels kind of like, I could go either direction. It's not like I need, to collect the grain, because that's the only way that it's going to work. Or, if I don't do that, I've got to get something else, a huge trade with something else that's as valuable. In this, it's a matter of, That could work. Okay, I can take that because I'm still getting a benefit and it helps me because maybe my first choice wasn't working. Getting specific buildings, etc. out there, I didn't feel too much value from that. Like getting the fortresses out there, nobody was all that interested in buying soldiers. And it's kind of tough to sell them. They're good, you kind of want them and you want to produce them to get that extra production. Maybe the same can't be said about some of the other options like warships and gifts of Poseidon. And if people had built those, they might have been able to get soldiers in exchange for them. Where it was very hard to convince anybody to sell them a soldier one for, just for resources. Because those soldiers produce resources through the game. It's a hard call, isn't it? I think there's a lot to this, though, that I'm not seeing yet. There's just so much interaction between all the different pieces. It kind of feels like in the end it doesn't matter, that you end up in just about the same place. It could be that some people get unlucky or make some bad decisions or whatever and fall behind. But as long as you're following a kind of fair path, it's like it diverges as you head out into different ways, but then it comes back together and converges into sort of a point. And the people who make it the whole way are the ones who are in the running for winning. Those who get stuck somewhere back here are going to have a hard time making their way back to that convergence. But for the most part, everybody's hand looks fairly similar at the end of the game. They have one of all of the buildings. And once you have that, it's easy enough. You can do anything you want it to do, right, with all those buildings. It's just a matter of getting the resources. Now, that's one of the issues. So, for example, whoever builds the tools and builds the fortress, well, they kind of want to have the resources that fuel that. We had one guy who was in that position who was producing the grapes and the grain and olives to build armies. Well, that means that person has sort of a direct link to that and is going to be very good at doing it, just because of his resource setup and his workshops that he could build. In a way, I almost wish that you could pick more your starting hand, as it were, because I felt that person had something of an advantage. Now, he didn't win. He ended up in the boned position where he had spent too much effort building stuff that produced and didn't get around to getting everything else built in time. Anyway, I think it was a decent amount of fun. It's important, I think, to keep in mind, say, the tiebreakers, because it did come down to the wire there, where if somebody didn't buy an academy, they were out of it. If they had bought all their buildings and not bought the academy. Now, the academy's a little tricky because it's got fires, but I don't feel like this is making a lot of sense in this particular, of course they never do, but I don't feel like I'm on focus here. I don't feel like I know enough about this game with one playing to really say anything definitive, except I think it's worth giving a shot and taking a look, seeing if there is more. I'm going to do it, and I'll be back maybe some other time with, this is awesome, or, it just didn't live up to it. But for a first look, it's pretty interesting.